In the cold corridors of Windsor, whispers ripple like ghostly echoes. Staffers speak in half-sentences, courtiers avoid eye contact, and the hum of restrained panic lingers beneath the polished silence. Something is shifting quietly, deliberately, and without a royal decree. Prince William, once portrayed as cautious and predictable, is now a man moving in the shadows of power. He speaks less, listens more, and acts with a precision that unsettles even those who once considered him an ally. The old routines no longer hold. The familiar rhythm of palace life feels interrupted by an invisible force, something that seems to pulse beneath the marble floors of Kensington and Windsor alike. Rumours spread faster than truth ever could, but one message remains constant. William is no longer waiting for permission. It began with silence. Meetings once open to trusted aides became limited to only a chosen few. Late-night discussions behind sealed doors replaced public appearances. Senior courtiers noticed the change immediately. His tone, his walk, even his eyes. There was purpose now, and perhaps something resembling defiance. They would see lights burning in his study long after midnight, outlines of advisors bent over confidential files, their expressions grave. Within those rooms, a plan was being drafted not of rebellion, but of preservation, a plan to protect the crown from itself. And though no official statement had been released, the palace's inner circle could feel the tremor of transition. The first signs were subtle, almost invisible to the outside world. A new signature appeared on internal correspondence, simple, direct, but symbolically significant. The official stationery of Kensington Palace underwent a quiet redesign. Even the royal website began reflecting nuanced adjustments in language phrases that placed the prince, not the king, at the center of institutional messaging. Those with sharp enough eyes saw the shift immediately. It wasn't just semantics, it was strategy. Titles were being reviewed, roles were being redrawn. A slow, deliberate rebalancing of royal hierarchy was in motion, and no one dared to question it aloud. Behind the scenes, friction increased. Traditionalists loyal to the old guard and King Charles's authority viewed William's calculated precision as audacious. They warned of overreach, premature assertion. But within William's private circle, the tone was different. Advisors whispered of a new era, one defined not by passive tradition, but by proactive control. William, they said, was tired of watching the monarchy stumble under the weight of outdated rituals and public distrust. He wanted reform, not through speeches, but through structure. And structure began with titles. The most whispered name among them was George. The young prince, still years from his destiny, had reportedly been granted a title no one had seen before, a gesture both symbolic and provocative. It signaled lineage, yes, but also succession. It was as though William was laying out the chessboard, moving pieces not for the present, but for the decades ahead. To the public, it would appear ceremonial, but to those within the royal walls, it was a declaration of intent. And at the heart of it all was Catherine. Poised yet unreadable, she became the quiet force balancing William's steel with grace. In every meeting, her calm dismantled resistance. Courtiers described her as the invisible architect, guiding decisions with the precision of a strategist and the intuition of a mother protecting her family's legacy. Every move William made seemed grounded in her influence, her counsel an unspoken alliance that even senior royals found unnerving. She wasn't just supporting him, she was shaping the monarchy alongside him. The press caught whispers, of course. Administrative reshuffles. They called it an innocent term for a storm brewing beneath royal formality. But within Windsor, they knew better. There was an urgency in the air, a sense that time itself was closing in on them. No one yet understood what had triggered this quiet revolution. But those who had seen William's private resolve knew that something deeper had changed. Because beneath all the whispers, beneath the signatures and sealed documents, lay a truth that could not be spoken publicly, a truth born not of ambition, but of fear. Fear that the throne itself was vulnerable, fear that the monarch was fading, and fear that if William didn't act soon, it might all come undone. And so, as the royal courtiers drifted through those dimly lit corridors, one question haunted them all. What had happened to the king? Because William's reshuffle, insiders say, began the night his father's health took a turn, no one was allowed to discuss. It was just after midnight when Windsor's West Wing went dark. Phones were confiscated. Corridors sealed. The silence was not routine, it was deliberate, heavy, and suffocating. Behind those guarded walls, a single reality loomed. The king's health had taken a sudden and dangerous turn. The official statement would later call it manageable, but those who witnessed that night knew it was far from ordinary. Inside the palace, panic moved quietly, like a shadow, controlled, orchestrated, but unmistakably real. And in that uneasy quiet, Prince William's destiny began to crystallize. Confusion reigned in the first few hours. Conflicting reports poured into Windsor from doctors and aides stationed near Sandringham. Some said the king had collapsed during an unscheduled private audience. Others whispered of a deeper medical issue that had been hidden from the public for months. Advisors scrambled to contain the chaos. Orders were given to restrict communication, to pause all outgoing channels until a verified statement could be prepared. Every text, every call, every document was intercepted or reviewed. Leaks were unthinkable because one wrong sentence could send the world into a frenzy. The monarchy's stability depended on silence. Yet, in the midst of that silence, another storm brewed. Queen Camilla, fiery and unyielding, was reportedly furious at being kept away from the early decisions. She demanded transparency. She demanded authority, but the message from William's office was clear. Decisions tonight would be made by those who could ensure continuity, not confusion. It was a message that stung deeply, one that would mark the beginning of a quiet but irreparable fracture between the two camps. Camilla saw it as a personal slight. William saw it as duty. As doctors fought for stability, William gathered his most trusted advisors in a small conference room adjoining the royal chapel. It was here, under the weight of history and the silence of a restless palace, that he made a private vow to protect his father's legacy, to shield his family from collapse, and to restore control before dawn. Those present later recalled the gravity in his tone. Gone was the patient air the world had known. What stood before them was a leader measured, deliberate, unflinching. For the first time, William convened a private council without his father's approval, a move both unprecedented and symbolic. At that moment, the monarchy had a new centre of gravity. What followed was swift. A small team was assigned to draft a contingency document, an outline of transitional power, disguised under bureaucratic language. It wasn't treason, it was insurance. The document, later known within the palace as the Transitional Restructuring Plan, detailed how key responsibilities could quietly shift toward William in the event of temporary incapacitation. It was a careful blend of compassion and control. And though no signature had yet been inked, its mere existence changed everything. By the early hours, the tone within the palace had shifted entirely. Staff who had once referred to His Majesty began, without instruction, to speak of the Prince when discussing immediate authority. It wasn't rebellion, it was instinct. Even protocol officers, the most loyal to the crown, adjusted their language as if guided by something unspoken. Power, it seemed, had found its new direction before anyone formally declared it. Outside the palace, the night passed like any other. The city slept, oblivious to the fact that inside Windsor's dimly lit chambers, centuries of tradition were being redefined in whispers. There were no speeches, no announcements, no royal signatures, only the soft rustle of papers, the scratch of a pen, and the faint sound of footsteps retreating down marble halls. By sunrise, the balance of power had changed, and the world had no idea. But those who saw the papers, those who heard William's voice steady and resolute in the darkest hour, knew one thing for certain. The monarchy had just entered a new age. She was never meant to lead, but destiny had other plans. While William worked in the shadows to reshape the monarchy's structure, Catherine became the quiet architect who gave those ambitions meaning. She didn't command through power or intimidation. She led through conviction, composure, and the unshakable understanding that survival in the modern monarchy wasn't about dominance, it was about relevance. Those close to her say she saw what others didn't, that the royal family's strength no longer depended on the throne's weight, but on the people's faith. And faith, in her eyes, could only be rebuilt through compassion, symbolism, and quiet, unbreakable unity. When the palace had begun to fracture under pressure, aides resigning, factions whispering, loyalties shifting, Catherine became the monarchy's silent stabilizer. Her background in public relations, once ridiculed by royal traditionalists, became her greatest weapon. She understood optics, emotion, and timing. When everyone panicked, she planned. She rewrote speeches to sound human, softened messages that once sounded imperial, and orchestrated subtle acts of grace that reminded the public why they loved her in the first place. It wasn't manipulation. It was preservation. And while William built the scaffolding of reform, Catherine filled it with heart. Insiders later revealed the existence of a leaked memo marked only with her initials. In it, she had urged William to modernize through symbolism, a phrase that would come to define the Quiet Revolution. It meant reshaping the monarchy not through decrees or speeches, but through gestures that spoke louder than words. Every appearance, every title adjustment, every handshake was deliberate. Catherine believed symbolism carried more weight than politics. She understood that if the people felt renewal, the monarchy could survive even its most fragile hour. William gave the plan momentum, but Catherine gave it meaning. Her influence didn't stop at the surface. Within palace corridors, a quiet loyalty began to form around her, especially among younger royal aides who saw in her something that had been missing from the monarchy for decades: authenticity. She didn't command respect by birthright, she earned it through presence. These new voices in the palace referred to her not as the Princess of Wales, but as the steady hand. They admired her calm amid chaos, her ability to look past protocol and see people from the butlers in Windsor to the ambassadors abroad. She didn't build alliances, she built faith. Even the church noticed her subtle rise. Privately, Catherine began holding meetings with senior clergy, discussing what she called moral authority, the idea that the crown's legitimacy must come not only from tradition, but from moral example. She spoke of service, duty, and forgiveness, choosing words that felt more pastoral than political. Some viewed it as inspired leadership, others saw it as dangerous overreach, especially Queen Camilla, who reportedly viewed Catherine's growing spiritual and public influence as a personal threat. It was said that Camilla confided in a close friend, calling Catherine the saint in waiting, and that makes her dangerous. The tension between them became a quiet undercurrent in royal life, visible only to those who knew where to look. Yet behind Catherine's polished poise was a steel resolve forged from sacrifice. Publicly, she radiated serenity, the perfect wife, the dutiful mother, the poised royal. But privately, she bore the burden of being both the heart and the strategist of a monarchy teetering on the edge of reinvention. She was the one who soothed William's doubts when his decisions drew criticism, the one who steadied him when power became too heavy. The image the world saw of calm smiles and graceful gestures hid the reality of endless sleepless nights and difficult conversations about the weight of legacy. To the public, she was the embodiment of continuity. To the crown, she had become its conscience. And as she watched William's reshuffle take shape, she understood better than anyone that this wasn't just a political shift, it was a generational one. What they built was not just for their time, but for the child who would inherit it. Every reform, every symbolic gesture, every moment of restraint was being recorded in the eyes of a young prince learning what it meant to rule not with fear, but with grace. But Catherine's influence didn't stop at Windsor's gates. It extended to a young prince watching every move his parents made. They called him the boy who carries the future. But George's destiny was rewritten long before he could understand what it truly meant. While most children his age were learning how to live freely, George was being prepared to reign not someday, but soon. Inside Windsor's walled silence, history was not being written, it was being rehearsed. Tutors, advisors, and historians surrounded him like a council of unseen architects, molding his thoughts, shaping his values, and ensuring that every word he spoke echoed with the weight of legacy. What his father gave him wasn't simply a title. It was the beginning of a burden, carefully disguised as privilege. The world never saw the moment his status quietly changed, but those within the palace did. Overnight, George's position in the royal hierarchy rose above what tradition dictated. His name began to appear on internal communications, listed above his uncles, occasionally even ahead of the Queen Consort. It was a subtle but unmistakable message that the monarchy was being refocused around him. The promotion wasn't announced, but insiders knew it was deliberate, a quiet declaration that the next generation's reign might arrive sooner than the world expected. It was a gift and a warning. For William, it was a decision born of both fear and foresight. He remembered the cold distance of his own upbringing, the endless expectations, the emotional restraint, the public scrutiny. He had once vowed never to repeat his father's mistakes, yet as he watched George grow, he realized how impossible that promise was. Power demanded sacrifice, legacy required conditioning, and so, the line between parenting and preparing began to blur. Behind closed doors, he pushed his son harder, demanding discipline, composure, and the kind of emotional restraint only years of duty could teach. Yet, every time he looked into his child's eyes, a familiar pain surfaced, the same one that once haunted his own. Catherine, ever the emotional center of the family, fought quietly against that transformation. She wanted her son to be a child, not a crown. She balanced her maternal instinct with her role as the future queen, torn between protecting George's innocence and preserving the monarchy's image. Every lesson, every public engagement, every appearance was a conflict between the mother who wanted to hold him close and the sovereign she was, helping shape. Her private moments were filled with doubt, the kind that no title or crown could quiet. She knew that each day of training took a little more of his childhood away. Those shaping George's future were not ordinary teachers. They were scholars of history, psychologists of leadership, and quiet students of human behavior. They taught him how to read faces before words, how to command silence before he ever spoke. These weren't lessons for a child, they were instructions for a ruler, and though his days seemed calm, beneath the surface, his mind was being prepared for something far greater than innocence could endure. Within the palace, whispers spread that the young prince's promotion carried constitutional implications, that it subtly redefined the order of succession, giving William a tool to cement his family's claim to the throne, even if unforeseen changes came. But to those closest to George, the implications weren't political, they were human. He had become a symbol, a living promise that the crown would endure, no matter how the winds of fate turned. And as George's crown glittered in secrecy, the shadows around Windsor began to stir because not everyone welcomed this reformation. Every monarchy has its Judas, and for the modern royal family, that moment came not with open rebellion, but with a leak, a whisper that turned into a storm. Clarence House, once a bastion of loyalty and tradition, became the epicenter of betrayal. Just days after William's quiet reshuffle began taking shape, classified documents found their way into foreign media outlets. Names, titles, future appointments, all exposed with surgical precision. It wasn't rumor or speculation, it was fact, printed in black and white. And what made it devastating was that the betrayal had come from within the royal walls themselves. The revelation sent shockwaves through the palace. Within hours, news channels dissected every leaked name, every alleged title shift. Analysts debated motives. Critics accused William of overreach. The Crown's communications team scrambled to draft statements that said nothing while implying control. Yet behind those perfectly crafted lines, chaos reigned. Advisors demanded answers. Security teams launched forensic audits of internal communications. But as the investigation deepened, one chilling truth emerged. The source wasn't an outsider. It was someone intimately tied to Clarence House. Someone with access not just to information, but to intent. That's when the whispers began to circle around one name, a senior aide long associated with Queen Camilla's network. The connection was too close, too convenient, too dangerous to ignore. William's advisors urged caution, warning that an open confrontation could ignite a royal civil war. But William's response was not fury, it was calculation. He understood the cost of public outrage. Anger would make headlines, silence would make history, and he chose silence as his weapon. That night, he issued quiet orders that never reached the press. Key Clarence House staff were dismissed under the guise of structural adjustments. Offices were locked, devices were confiscated. Files disappeared into secure archives. The purge was swift, silent, and absolute. Those within the royal machinery described it as the night of erased names. By morning, no one spoke of it, but everyone felt its chill. A message had been sent: betrayal within the house would not only be punished, it would be forgotten. Still, the damage was done. The leak had drawn blood, and blood, once spilled, changes everything. Camilla's allies whispered that William had gone too far, that he was consolidating power, cutting out anyone who dared to question him. Meanwhile, William's camp quietly accused Clarence House of deliberate sabotage. The unspoken conflict between stepson and stepmother began to harden into hostility. Publicly, their smiles remained intact, their gestures cordial. But beneath the gilded formality, trust had evaporated. Every glance at official events, every public appearance together, now carried the tension of two monarchies coexisting in one family. Even the staff could sense it. Clarence House grew quieter. Windsor is more guarded. Advisors began choosing sides, some drifting toward William's progressive vision, others clinging to Camilla's traditionalist authority. It was no longer just a question of succession, it was a battle for influence, fought not in headlines, but in whispers, appointments, and access. And though William appeared calm, those close to him saw the transformation taking root. The boy who once followed tradition now commanded it. The heir had become the strategist. But what none of them knew, what even his closest allies couldn't yet see, was that this betrayal had forced William to accelerate his plan. The crown was changing shape faster than ever before, and every betrayal only made his resolve stronger. The monarchy would evolve, even if it meant breaking from its own blood. Yet even betrayal could not halt the momentum, because William's true plan was far from complete. The most shocking revelation was yet to come. It happened on a rain-soaked night inside the Windsor estate's green drawing room. 7 figures gathered around an oak table. No cameras, no aides, no signatures. This was not a family meeting. It was a pact. Each attendee understood the weight of what they were about to do. Prince William sat at the head, not as heir apparent, but as a man ready to redefine the very institution that had shaped him. Across from him sat Catherine, calm yet resolute, her presence commanding the room without words. Beside her were 2 senior military advisors, a trusted bishop, and 3 members of William's confidential strategy circle, the architects of what insiders would one day call the Windsor Accord. It was not a reform, it was a recalibration of power. The discussions were cold, deliberate, and charged with unspoken consequence. Those present were sworn to absolute secrecy. No records would exist, no transcripts, no digital trace. Only memory and loyalty would preserve the moment. The purpose of this covert assembly was simple yet audacious: to consolidate royal authority into a framework that would outlast political shifts, media attacks, and even the fragility of age itself. William believed the monarchy could not survive on tradition alone. The crown must evolve or die. He reportedly declared a phrase that would later echo through palace corridors like a prophecy. The first clause of the Windsor Accord granted William unprecedented autonomy over the allocation of royal titles and duties. It stripped away bureaucratic barriers, allowing him to act decisively, without parliamentary delay or ceremonial consultation. In effect, it created a new chain of command within the royal system, one that flowed through William, bypassing the old methods that had once defined the institution. It was a quiet revolution wrapped in protocol, a rewriting of royal DNA disguised as administrative efficiency. Yet Catherine, ever the moral compass, refused to let the plan become a pure power grab. She insisted the accord include a pillar devoted to public service and ethical leadership. "Power without purpose is peril," she had said, urging that the crown's evolution must reflect compassion, transparency, and moral renewal. Her influence softened what might have become an authoritarian design, transforming it instead into a vision of reform grounded in responsibility. To her, this was not about domination, but restoration, a way to rebuild faith in a monarchy whose fractures had begun to show. Still, not everyone at that table agreed. Some argued that bypassing parliamentary tradition risked a constitutional backlash. Others warned of political scrutiny if word ever escaped. But William had anticipated this. His strategy was to control the narrative before anyone else could shape it. A plan was drawn to leak selective, carefully curated information, subtle changes to public communications, revised ceremonial language, hints of modernization that would acclimate the public to reform before they even realized it was happening. It was manipulation masked as modernization, and it worked flawlessly. The phrase, "the crown must evolve or die," became their internal mantra whispered among aides, embedded in memos, guiding every decision that followed. To those within the inner circle, it symbolized progress. To those left outside, it sounded like treason. The Windsor Accord was both an act of preservation and defiance, a gamble that would either save the monarchy or divide it forever. As the night ended, the papers were sealed, the lights dimmed, and the participants departed one by one, bound by an oath that none dared to break. Only William and Catherine remained silent, aware that what they had set in motion could never be undone. Outside, the rain had stopped, but within the palace walls, a storm had only begun to gather, because every reform births resistance, and soon the old guard strikes back, determined to protect their fading power at any cost. From Buckingham's aging corridors came a revolt cloaked in etiquette. The old guard veteran courtiers, loyalists to Charles, and defenders of centuries-old order rose from their polished silence. They had tolerated William's reshuffle as a temporary disturbance, a youthful experiment that would fade with time. But after the Windsor Accord, it became clear that this was no phase. William was not waiting to inherit power, he was taking it. To traditionalists, it was blasphemy in royal form. And so, in whispers and subtle memos, they began their counterstrike. It started with language, words crafted with the precision of a dagger. Media briefings suddenly appeared in long-favoured newspapers, anonymous, but unmistakably sourced from inside the establishment. They painted William as ambitious, impatient, a man preparing for a coronation, in all but name. The phrase spread like wildfire. It appeared in op-eds, talk shows, and political panels. It was repeated until it began to sound like truth. The image of the dutiful heir was slowly replaced with that of a schemer, a man rewriting royal destiny in his favour. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Let public suspicion do what palace protocol could not. Behind the scenes, Queen Camilla's hand was never proven, but her fingerprints were everywhere. Certain journalists, known to have her ear, began receiving carefully timed leaks details only someone close to Clarence House could possess. "Stability must be earned, not seized," one headline read, quoting an unnamed royal confidant. To those within the palace, that phrasing was a warning shot. The rift between William and Camilla, once quiet and contained, had become an open secret. She saw his rise as an erosion of her husband's reign. He saw her loyalty to the old guard as obstruction. Every exchange between them, smiles, nods, public gestures, was now a performance, their civility concealing disdain. As the campaign intensified, the strain on Catherine deepened. Publicly, she remained the beacon of warmth and unity, smiling through engagements, greeting crowds, speaking of compassion and continuity. But privately, the toll was immense. She watched her husband become more guarded, more distant, consumed by the quiet war raging in the halls of power. Friends noticed her exhaustion. Advisors spoke of tension behind closed doors, her attempts to hold together a household being quietly torn apart by politics and pride. She understood what William was fighting for, but she also feared what it was turning him into. Inside the palace, William's circle began to shrink. Allies grew cautious. Some distanced themselves altogether, fearing association might end their careers. Meetings that once overflowed with enthusiasm now carried an air of suspicion. Every word was measured, every loyalty questioned. People surrounded him, yet utterly alone. And as the isolation deepened, so did his resolve. If they wanted a leader to fear, he would give them one. Then came the moment that changed everything, the sudden disappearance of a long-serving private secretary, a man who had served both Charles and William faithfully for years. No statement, no farewell, no explanation. One morning, he was gone, and the palace refused to comment. The silence was deafening. Rumours spread of internal espionage, of misplaced documents, of loyalty questioned one time too many. To outsiders, it seemed routine, but to insiders, it was a sign that William had begun cleansing his court from within. By then, the monarchy was a house divided, half clinging to tradition, half marching toward reinvention. The air was thick with unease, but beneath it all, there was also a strange anticipation. Everyone sensed something monumental was coming, a move so bold it would either cement William's authority or destroy it completely. And just when it seemed the crown itself would fracture, William unveiled the move that would silence critics and alter royal history. There was no parade, no anthem, no cheering crowds, just a quiet declaration inside the ancient walls of Windsor. No cameras, no fanfare, no spectacle. Yet in that silence, history shifted. That day, Prince William enacted the most radical reordering of royal titles since 1952. In one decisive moment, he reshaped the monarchy from within. George became Prince of Windsor. Catherine was named Queen Regent Designate. Courtiers, hardened by decades of royal protocol, stood in stunned disbelief. It wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. And with that single act, William didn't just claim power, he claimed destiny. The ceremony, if it could be called one, was witnessed by only a handful of trusted figures, senior advisors, clergy, and members of his private circle. The air was thick with tension, but also reverence. Nobody asked what they were seeing. The lines between legality and authority blurred that day, as the Windsor move defied every precedent in the royal archives. Even constitutional experts who reviewed it later were divided. Some called it visionary, others reckless. But within those walls, William knew the monarchy could no longer survive by clinging to outdated scripts. It needed structure, continuity, and most of all, control. Catherine's moment came in the centre of that gathering. As William read out her new title, she rose with a steadiness that silenced the room. When she took his hand, it wasn't in ceremony, it was in solidarity. And when she swore her vow to protect the crown from within, even the most stoic courtiers felt the weight of it. Her words carried the gravity of an oath to the people, not just the institution. Those present would later describe it as the most emotional moment of the entire process, a marriage of duty and destiny sealed in silence. It wasn't coronation pomp, it was continuity reborn through resolve. The Windsor move was more than an administrative reshuffle. It was symbolism weaponized. By repositioning titles and redefining roles, William created a structure that centered the crown's survival around his family. It made George the visible future and Catherine the spiritual guardian. The monarchy, once fragmented by rivalry, now appeared united under a single, modern framework. Every change had been deliberate. Every title was chosen not for prestige, but for purpose. The gesture was both emotional and political, a statement that evolution could happen without revolution. Yet one figure remained silent through it all. King Charles. His response was neither approval nor objection, merely absence. Those close to him described his reaction as deep contemplation, though some suspected quiet resignation. He neither praised nor challenged the move, allowing ambiguity to become his message. His silence, in its own way, gave William something far more powerful than permission. It gave him space. For in the absence of resistance, reform took root. Outside the palace, the effects were immediate, though subtle. Public notices began to change. Website headers reflected new hierarchies, small alterations in ceremonial language, hinted at something greater unfolding behind the scenes. And while the public tried to make sense of it, official spokespeople offered polished denials, claiming these were administrative clarifications. But the truth had already begun to unfold. The monarchy had been rewritten in plain sight, and no one had stopped it. Windsor, that night, was both a fortress and a birthplace, a place where tradition met transformation. William had not overthrown the monarchy, he had re-engineered it. Those who witnessed it understood its brilliance. Those who didn't would only see its ripples later, when power began to behave differently, more decisively, more deliberately royal. It was a coronation without a crown, a succession without a funeral. But even as Windsor celebrated, across the Channel, the truth began to leak, and the world's perception of Britain's royal family would never be the same. Weeks later, the world woke to headlines that read like the opening of a political thriller, a royal coup in Windsor. Across front pages, pundits debated whether Britain had just witnessed a moment of visionary reform or the quiet overthrow of tradition itself. The words were loud, but inside Windsor there was only calm. William and Catherine walked the castle grounds hand in hand, George trailing beside them, the image of harmony and order. To the public, it looked serene. To those who knew the truth, it was the calm that followed a storm that changed history. The crown, it seemed, had been reborn, but the question lingered. Into what? Across the globe, reactions split, along emotional lines. Some saw in William a modern reformer, bold, decisive, and willing to evolve the monarchy before time buried it. They called him the king who never needed a coronation. Others saw something darker, an orchestrator of control, a man who had used reform as camouflage for consolidation. International networks framed it as the softest coup in royal history. Parliament demanded explanations, but none came. Statements were carefully worded, phrases vague. The palace neither confirmed nor denied the legitimacy of the Windsor move. In that silence, power found permanence. For the British people, confusion gave way to fascination. Polls surged in William's favour, particularly among younger generations who saw in him a leader unafraid of evolution. But among traditionalists, there was unease, a feeling that something sacred had quietly been rewritten. The monarchy, once an anchor of continuity, now seemed alive, unpredictable, even human. In pubs, in newspapers, in parliaments, the same question echoed. Was this courage or cunning? Was William saving the monarchy or reshaping it into something entirely his own? Through it all, one figure carried the emotional weight of it all, Prince George. Barely into his teens, he had become the living symbol of a new era, the embodiment of both legacy and experiment. Advisors shielded him from the debates, but the boy understood enough to feel the burden. Every lesson, every public appearance, every word he spoke carried a weight his father had once known too well, the pressure to be perfect in a world hungry for cracks. Yet, unlike generations before him, George's future was not just inherited, it was engineered, and whether he grew to embrace or resist it would determine the monarchy's next fate. It was Catherine who brought the kingdom's focus back to meaning. In her first public address after the Windsor transition, she spoke softly but with unmistakable conviction. "The crown endures, only when it serves," she said. "Titles mean nothing without purpose. We do not seek to rule, but to remain worthy of remembrance." Her words cut through the noise, framing the revolution not as power seized, but duty renewed. The nation listened and believed her. For all William's strategic genius, it was Catherine's grace that made the act feel not like a coup, but a calling. As for Charles, his silence endured. He retreated quietly into his private estate, neither dethroned nor in command. Those close to him described a man at peace, watching history unfold with the detached serenity of one who had finally made peace with legacy. Some say his silence was disapproval, others that it was consent. Perhaps it was both a father's understanding that the monarchy, like life itself, must yield to its next generation or perish. And so, the crown stood unchallenged, unbroken, but forever changed. William's reign had begun without ceremony, without coronation, without permission. History would debate his motives, but his impact was undeniable. The monarchy was no longer an institution bound by inheritance. It had become an instrument of will. And so ends one chapter, not with the echo of trumpets, but with the sound of a crown being passed, quietly, from one generation to the next.